You probably remember learning about Darwin's finches in school, right? They're like the textbook example of evolution. But what if the story we all learned is missing a huge piece of the puzzle? What if the finches weren't just passively shaped by their environment, but were actually the architects of their own evolution? Okay, so here's where we're headed. We're going to start with that classic story we all think we know. Then we'll stumble upon this really strange puzzle on the Galapagos Islands. And that leads us to a pretty surprising twist, one that doesn't just change how we see these birds, but maybe how we see evolution itself. So let's set the scene, the Galapagos Islands. A couple million years ago, a small flock of finches gets blown off course and lands there. Just one group. And from that single flock, they would explode into 14 totally distinct species. It's no wonder they became the poster children for evolution. And what makes them so famous, what makes them such a perfect example, is their beaks. Each one is like a perfectly designed tool for a specific job. You've got these ground finches with thick, heavy-duty beaks for cracking tough seeds. Then you have cactus finches with these long, delicate beaks perfect for getting into flowers. One of them even uses tools, which is just incredible. It's this beautiful, clear-cut picture of adaptation. Now, for a long, long time, most of the 20th century really, the explanation for all this seemed super straightforward, and it all came down to genes. The basic story was that your DNA calls the shots and the organism just, well, follows orders. This idea got packaged up into what's known as the modern synthesis. And it was a huge deal because it merged Darwin's theory of natural selection with the brand new science of genetics. It finally solved Darwin's biggest headache. He never really knew how traits got passed down. The modern synthesis had the answer. Random mutations in your genes create variety, and then nature picks the winner. So the model works like this. First, a group of birds gets stranded on an island. Second, random little mistakes, mutations, happen in their DNA over time. Third, nature, the environment, selects which of those mistakes are actually helpful. Maybe a slightly bigger beak helps a bird survive a drought. Fourth, over many, many generations, those little changes add up and boom, you have a new species. The key thing here is that the finch is just a passive player in this whole drama, just being shaped by its genes and its surroundings. And Darwin himself did not mince words about how this works. He called it a struggle for existence. It's this brutal, relentless competition. The environment is the ultimate judge, jury, and executioner, and only the ones who happen to have the winning genetic lottery ticket get to survive and pass those genes on. But, and here's where it gets really interesting, that elegant story starts to show some cracks. As powerful as that gene-centric view is, it can't quite explain everything we see on the Galapagos. In fact, when you zoom out from the finches, a pretty big puzzle starts to take shape. This is the million-dollar question. I mean, the Galapagos were basically an evolutionary playground, right? All these open jobs, these empty niches, just waiting to be filled. So if the process is just random mutation plus natural selection, you'd think we'd see this kind of explosive diversification happening with lots of different animals. But we don't. And when you look at the numbers, it's pretty stark. The finches are this massive outlier, 14 different species. Compare that to mockingbirds, only 4. Rodents? Some. Bats? None. It just doesn't quite add up. Why them? What was their secret? Well, it turns out the secret ingredient wasn't in their genes, it was in their heads. The missing piece of the puzzle, the thing that explains the finch's wild success, is something the classic model pretty much ignored: their ability to learn. Now, don't get me wrong, genetics is absolutely crucial. It sets the stage. I mean, look at this graph. If you have a bigger beak, you are physically better at cracking hard seeds. Your genes determine what you can do. But, and this is the game changer, learning determines what a finch chooses to do. They weren't just passively waiting for a drought to kill off all the soft seeds. They were active agents. A finch could figure out through trial and error, hey, I'm pretty good at eating this, or even discover a totally new food source nobody else was using. They could make decisions. And this ability to learn, this behavioral flexibility, was like a superpower. By learning what to eat, they could create their own little specialized jobs. By learning specific complex songs, they actually created cultural barriers. A finch from one group wouldn't mate with a finch from another because their songs were just too different. And by learning to prefer certain nesting spots, they accelerated their own separation. Learning put them in the driver's seat of their own evolution. So, this insight about the finches really opens up a much bigger, more dynamic way of looking at evolution. Some people call it the extended synthesis. It's not about throwing Darwin out, not at all. It's about adding a new layer, recognizing that what an organism does, its behavior, its choices, is a massive force in its own evolution. This chart really nails the difference. The old school view saw the organism as a passive object, like a piece of clay being molded by genes in the environment. But this new view sees the organism as an active agent, not just the clay, but also the sculptor, helping to shape its own evolutionary path. One of the key ideas here is something called niche construction. It's the idea that organisms aren't just adapting to their environment, they're actively changing it. And the best example is us. Think about cooking. That's a cultural behavior, not a genetic one. But by cooking our food, we made it easier to digest. That new environment we created then favored smaller jaws and guts, which freed up metabolic energy for our brains to get bigger. Our behavior literally changed our genes. And this quote just sums it up so perfectly. It sounds like a riddle, right? But it means we're not just shaped by the world around us, we also shape the world, which in turn shapes us. It's a feedback loop. We co-create our own evolutionary journey. Okay, so let's take one final step back. Because this whole story about how our understanding of the finches evolved, it's also a story about how science itself works. It moves forward by questioning the very assumptions we don't even realize we're making. And this is such a great example of those hidden assumptions. For decades, the standard view in biology was that males were the active ones in courtship, competing with each other for passive females who just waited to be chosen. It was only when scientists started to seriously question that assumption that they realized, whoa, females are often the ones actively choosing, comparing, and really driving the whole process. The parallel here is just amazing when you think about it. We went from seeing organisms as passive objects being shaped by their genes to seeing them as active subjects making decisions. And at the same time, we've gone from seeing females as passive recipients in mating to seeing them as active agents in selection. In both cases, the big breakthrough came from recognizing that these individuals had agency. And that really is the thought I want to leave you with. The story of Darwin's finches is this powerful reminder that science is never truly settled. It's a constant process of challenging our own blind spots. And it makes you wonder, doesn't it? What are the passive finches in science today? What big, fundamental assumptions are we all making right now that are just waiting for someone to question them and revolutionize everything all over again?